Most people think capturing and bringing black Africans as slaves during the transatlantic slave trade was the worst action that could be done. But the truth is, people often miss the details that have been wittingly removed from history books. Only men were not enslaved. Rather, black African women were captured too. They were cramped in the lower decks of slave ships that would take weeks to months in reaching the United States. During this long period of the journey, the slave ship captain and crew would grow animalistic, holding urges and desires to exploit the women on the deck. How they used to abuse those black African women slaves sexually literally shook humanity. The ship crew and captains would think of new ways to satiate their sexual desires. What was done to the African black women slaves and how they were exploited sexually? Welcome to a new episode of Black Culture Diary, a channel where we talk about less known and hidden black history, culture, arts, and lost civilization. We scrutinize history here to bring the black culture back on the surface again. We would like to thank you, the members of our community who have been watching our videos and supporting us. For those who are new, we encourage you to join our community in supporting and building a strong black history education medium. In this episode, we will expose the tragic incidents of sexual exploitation of black African women slaves on the slave ships. Let's get started. During the transatlantic slave trade, an agonizing chapter in human history unfurled, spanning from the 15th to the 19th century. In this harrowing era, an estimated 12 to 15 million Africans were wrenched from their homelands and thrust into the Western Hemisphere, their destinies cruelly intertwined with forced labor and abject suffering. As these poor souls embarked on a treacherous journey across the Atlantic, lasting between 7 to 13 grueling weeks, the seeds of sexual abuse and exploitation were sown. During the creaking ships and the unforgiving sea, tragic and horrific things would happen, bearing witness to the depths of human debasement. In the heart of this turmoil, the horrifying realities endured by the captives, especially black women, came to light. Regrettably, many remain unaware of the heinous atrocities committed by those who wielded power, slave masters and ship crew members alike. Black Africans, especially the African women who were now made slaves, already scarred by the trauma of displacement, were subjected to suffering. They used abuse as a weapon to methodically dismantle their humanity. The scars they bore were not just physical. They penetrated their very souls, leaving wounds that lingered far beyond the ship's horrid confines. The nightmare would start at the moment of their capture. Black women, forced into a cruel theater of dehumanization, were paraded at slave auctions. Their bodies, treated as commodities, were exposed for potential buyers to inspect, reducing them to vessels meant solely for breeding. But the nightmare didn't stop there. Even before they boarded the nightmarish vessels, these individuals were subjected to invasive and degrading examinations. Driven by an insidious desire for control, slave traders subjected women and young girls to insufferable harassment, gauging their reproductive capacities through invasive and degrading measures. Their bodies became mere playthings for the traders, a reminder of their powerlessness. The abuse extended to men and boys as well, who were subjected to sexual assault, a grim preview of the horrors that awaited them on the ships. Once on board, the holds of the ships became dark chambers of suffering, cramming both men and women into spaces meant for cargo, not human life. These unfortunate souls were condemned to lives of subjugation in foreign lands. The ship crews, fueled by insatiable greed and an utter disregard for human dignity, changed into traders of torment. They perpetuated a cycle of cruelty that was dehumanizing for enslaved African women. Denied even the most essential comforts, they were subjected to unspeakable atrocities that laid bare the monstrous nature of the ship crews. Many historians like Angela Davis have written about the sufferings of black African women slaves. She wrote that the ship crew was given free access to black women slaves so they could be raped and sexually brought to their places, which was never to object to whatever was said. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Within the suffocating confines of the ships, these vulnerable women faced not only physical torment, but also the horrors of mental and emotional agony. Malnutrition, disease, and dire living conditions led to alarmingly high mortality rates. The journey, already an ordeal of unfathomable proportions, was compounded by the wretched conditions they endured. Yet the brutality did not stop at their physical suffering. The ship crews wielded their authority as abusers, employing violence and sexual exploitation as instruments of dominance. Dehumanization was their chosen method, stripping these women of their dignity, autonomy, and even their basic humanity. Their bodies, once temples of life and hope, became objects of malevolent desire, robbed of agency and voice. As if the horrors of the confined spaces were not enough, these women were stripped of their garments and autonomy. A twisted form of control dictated that they be disrobed, their nudity becoming a haunting symbol of the helplessness that engulfed them. The deliberate separation from their male counterparts further deepened their vulnerability, rendering them easy prey for the predatory impulses of their tormentors. The depths of degradation knew no bounds. In some instances, the black women slaves were forced to stand naked before the inhumane gaze of the crew, a cruel theater of dominance that defied the bounds of human empathy. The white sailors and ship captains, armed with the privilege of authority, stooped to the lowest depths of humanity. They exploited their positions to enact heinous acts of sexual violence against these defenseless women. Their abuse wasn't just about immediate physical domination. It was a tool of power, a means to assert dominance and control, to reduce these women to mere instruments for their sick gratification. The spectrum of cruelty spanned from unwanted advances and degrading harassment to full-blown assaults, all executed in the chilling pursuit of dominance. The psychological trauma on these black women slaves bore a devastating legacy, etching wounds that seeped into the very essence of their being. Stripped of their humanity, their identities were reduced to objects of vile desire. Yet satisfying sexual desires was not the only point. Often, disobedience and resistance by African male slaves led to horrors inflicted on women slaves. The crew members would go and find daughters and sisters of the resisting black male slaves. Then, they would be ripped off of their clothes and made to stand naked before their brothers and fathers. You see, the ship crew was allowed to use any means necessary to bring the slaves into subjugation. There have been reports when unethical and chilling incidents like raping young girls of age between 8 to 10 years occurred on the slave ship decks. In some cases, the ship captain would choose the African woman slave he wanted and use her for over 3 nights. Giving proof of the worst form of being humans, the crew member would take turns on the same black woman, silencing her by exploiting her sexually. After this, they knew she would never rise and resist, and her relatives would stay in order. Sometimes, African women slaves would give birth on the slave ships. Their children made an addition to the total number of slaves they held on ships. However, when the mother of a newborn showed any disobedience, the slave crew would throw the newborn into the ocean. Yes, this was the level of humanity in Europeans who called themselves the most delicate human beings. On those slave ships, the captain was the supreme ruler, and he could do whatever he pleased. He could play with the lives of the African people and sometimes satisfy his sadistic needs and desires. Since no ethics existed at that time, there was nothing the ship crew could not do. Even though the sexual exploitation and the conditions under which this was done have been reported by various historians, the exact details were never reported. It's because the ship crew would never tell what they had done. And as for African people, their statements and sufferings were never heard and made part of history. But one thing is certain, black African women slaves would have seen how low humans can fall, experiencing lower than animals behaviors. Tell us, did you know about this earlier? Isn't it true that the black African slaves saw the worst face of humanity and how low humans can morally fall? Let us know what you think about this. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.